Hello, and welcome to part 2 of the 2021 CTR series. My name is Shelley Frappier. I guess you've noticed by now that Casey is not here today. She has her beautiful little Stella at a lot of appointments, so I stepped in to help out. My name is Shelley Frappier. Many of you know me as Nico's Mama and the Acute Syndrome Foundation Executive Assistant. I wanted to start today to acknowledge a loss we had in the community today. Sweet Carson lost his battle with SCN8A today, and I just wanted to let his parents know, Todd and Paula, that you're in our hearts. We're thinking about you always, and we'll always fight in your honor, Carson, along with all the rest of our angels, and you will always be remembered in everything that we do. And take a moment too for everyone else that's going through a lot of difficult things yesterday, and it's just been a long 18 months with COVID. But we'll get started. Since the clinical trial readiness series was so popular last fall, we decided to roll it out again. Today is the second part in a 6-part where we will front load some of the learning that you may have done in the gathering so that we can move into the gathering this December feeling up to date on where things are. So for the next 4 weeks, make sure that you keep your calendar open on Wednesdays from 12 to 1 as we continue to roll out the CTR series. If you missed the kickoff of the CTR series this past Saturday, thanks. If you missed the kickoff of the CTR series this past Saturday, don't fret. It was recorded, and we will send that out to you as soon as we have you. As soon as we have it from the organizers. It was a casual conversation with European SCN8A leaders, Roland and Cinzia, along with our Hilary Savoy, where they shared their international SCN8A collaborative efforts and updated us on their amazing SCN2A and SCN8A conference in Germany. It was lovely to see them all again, and we are sending our love to Ben as he could not be there in person, but had such an important role in the event. Today, we have the opportunity to have a conversation with Michelle Campbell, an FDA representative, about the drug approval process so that we can better understand the FDA's role in clinical trials. We do have a few housekeeping items. Group interaction through questions or comments will take place in the chat box only. It is on your right. It allows you to type questions and responses for Hilary and Michelle. If you're experiencing any technical issues that may come along, please type in the chat box again, and I will do my best to help. When in doubt, refresh and try Google Chrome. Before we get started, I also wanted to extend a huge thank you to our platinum level CTR sponsors, Neurocrine and Praxis, for their continued support for our community. Now, I would like to introduce to you our very own Hilary Savoy. She is the director and founder of the Acute Syndrome Foundation and has poured her energy and focus into fighting for our SCN8A community for the past 8 years. Not for the title or personal recognition, but because she is a parent just like us that wants nothing short for our kids to be happy, to thrive, and have more good days than bad. Without further ado, our possibly still jet-lagged and fearless leader, Hilary Savoy.
Hi, Shelley. Thank you so much. Can you hear me okay?
I can, and I can see you have a beautiful friend behind you that we've all been happy to see, and I hope you share a little bit with him.
Yeah. Actually, Prem, come here, bud. You come say hi. Up. This is Prem. So this is Esme's new service dog and new member of our family. So thanks, Prem. So perfect. We thank you so much for taking over for Casey this week, and Shelley for the lovely introduction, and also for, as you said, taking a moment to honor the loss we've experienced this morning. It is part of the reality of our patient population and our families, and it does not get easier knowing that. And I always think my response is always that we have to go to work and work even harder in honor of our children. So with that, I think we'll get started today. And I'm going to do a quick intro, and then I'll invite Michelle to join us.
Awesome.
Okay.
Enjoy. Anybody has any problems, try to text me. I'll do the chat box, or I'll keep checking the Facebook as well to make sure everybody gets in.
Fantastic. Okay, hi everyone. I know we getting started a little on the late side. We still have a few people coming in to join us, and it's been a little while since we've been here in the sort of full official CTR setting. Last year last weekend we had kind of an unofficial kickoff, so that was a little different, and this is kind of back to our more formal, which is never very formal, approach. So as Shelley said, I'm the founder and the director of the Acute Syndrome Foundation, and while we did kick off this clinical trial readiness series for 2021 from Bonn, Germany, over the weekend, in order to give our European partners a chance to fill the community in on their really exciting things that are happening in Europe, coming out of the first SCN2A and 8A European conference. And the exciting work that they're doing on their own for themselves in partnership with us and other leaders is just extraordinary. And I was so happy to get to be there. But again, today marks the sort of official kickoff for the CTR series. As a reminder, last year, this series really focused on getting our community ready for clinical trials. However, now in 2021, we're kind of looking at a different landscape than what we were looking at this time last year, which was sort of fingers crossed. Hi, Michelle. So yes, without further ado, here is Michelle Campbell, PhD, who is here from the FDA Office of Neuroscience, to talk to us a bit more about what our community is facing as clinical trials start to look real for us. Dr. Campbell, do you want to say a couple words just so I can make sure I can hear you?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Perfect.
Yay.
Yes. Yay.
I'm actually slightly multitasking. I got a quick message from someone who's trying to get into a meeting, and I have the link. Go figure. So I'm trying to send that to them so I can actually turn off my email so we don't have that dinging in the background.
You know what? Totally fine. You take your time. I can chat a little bit just about kind of what we did last year while you get that reset, and then we can talk about also what this program is going to look like for this year. So as I said, last year, the kind of basic educational work that we were doing as a community in this series was, what is a clinical trial? What are inclusion and exclusion criteria? What happens when there's a slowdown? And what is the role that patients play in giving data to clinical trials, deciding to enroll in one and using their data to help hopefully work towards the approval of a treatment. This year, again, our world is totally different. We are looking at our first trial for the SCN8A community is live on clinicaltrials.gov. We are looking at, hopefully starting to enroll patients very soon. And the questions are now shifting within the community, and they look more like, okay, now what are the nitty-gritty details? What's happening at FDA? What's that black box? How do we open that up? And then also, what if our children don't qualify for clinical trials or we don't want to enroll them? How else can we continue to be engaged in this process long term? So I have had the great joy of interacting with Dr. Campbell on a couple of occasions, and in the last year, including a pretty fun conversation as I was driving across country to get Prem, and just kind of discussing what we know about rare disease drug development and what we don't know, and what this relationship can and should look like. And so I'm just so excited. Dr. Campbell, I'm assuming, are you good?
I'm good. I just knew how to share my slides for everyone to see, and then we're good to go.
Absolutely. So I guess maybe just to start, we can, for your slides when you're ready, it is the...
I got it.
Oh, cool. I knew you'd figure it out.
I'll figure it out.
Probably faster at it than I would have figured it out. So yeah, I think if you want to, first of all, just thank you so much for joining us today. And I think our community is so grateful to have this opportunity to just talk to you and get to hear directly from you what you do and who you are, and also why you do what you do. So if you want to kick it off with your slides, and then we can dig into some discussion.
Yeah, not a problem. And hopefully what you're seeing is like the actual slides and not the presenter view, because I always feel like with these technologies, you always end up getting the different view. So as Hillary said,
we do see the presenter view. If you don't have notes, it's not it's not a problem from our perspective.
Yeah.
If it's a problem for you, I just want to be sure that
it's not. It's not. Okay. And I don't want to take away from figuring it out for our discussion time. So if you guys are okay, I'm okay. So as Hillary said, my name is Michelle Campbell, and I lead stakeholder engagement and clinical outcomes for the Office of Neuroscience, which is based in the Office of New Drugs and the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research at the US FDA. And the Office of Neuroscience comprises of 4 therapeutic review divisions, as well as our non-clinical review division. And so our therapeutic review divisions is our 2 divisions of neurology, our division of psychiatry, and then our division of addictions, analgesia, and pain medicine. And so together we make up the Office of Neuroscience. And it's particularly in the divisions of the 2 divisions of neurology, we have a lot of rare diseases that we see. And so I thank you for inviting me to come and talk to you today about the drug development process and things to think about as you guys are merging into the drug development space. I'd also like to share my condolences to the family of the child Carson, who's recently passed. Some of my first work was working in a children's hospital for children with neurodevelopmental disabilities, and working with a family group just like you guys. And these were always the hard mornings when you would find out that someone had passed. So my condolences, but as you say, we continue to do our work in memory of those who've passed and to help those going forward with hopefully a treatment and maybe a cure. We don't know what the future will hold us with science. So usually when I talk about what's happening with FDA, I often talk a lot about patient-focused drug development. But I think today I want to take a few minutes before we get into our conversation to talk a little about the history of the FDA and exactly what we do and what we do not do. So I'm going to highlight on some interesting history parts of the FDA that you may or may not have been aware of. So the history of the FDA, we actually started as a part of a bureau of the USDA, and we were called the Bureau of Chemistry. And the Bureau of Chemistry really was responsible for looking at chemicals and things like that were making up products. So if we really start looking at what does the modern FDA look like, it started actually in 1906 when the Pure Food and Drug Act was passed. And this was an act that added regulatory responsibilities to our specific scientific mission of the agency. It prohibited interstate transport of unlawful food and drugs under penalty of seizure. And this is important as it had some, and while this was important, it did have some shortcomings because it didn't regulate medical devices or cosmetics, and it didn't give the FDA any real authority to inspect factories or prosecute false therapeutic claims. And it really didn't give us much control over what drugs could be marketed. So I'm sure we've all the stories of, seeing photos from this time of the snake oil elixirs and can cure everything in the kitchen sink from these medicines. But at the time, the FDA didn't have that authority to really regulate. So then our next milestone, it came in 1937. And really, this is what has defined what FDA does. So in 1937, there was a company that tried to introduce an elixir of sulfurilamide. This is a flavorful liquid medicine that was used as a new anti-infective treatment and was supposed to be a wonder drug. The problem is that the manufacturer used an untested solvent of diethylene glycol, which we know as antifreeze, And so by the time the FDA became aware of this problem and was able to finally remove the product from the shelf, the preparation of this had actually caused hundreds of deaths, including many children from this. So when this happened, this actually really invigorated Congress to consider replacing the 1906 Pure Food and Drug Act. There actually had been a bill that was hanging around for a couple of years and really hadn't gotten any momentum. And because of this, what happened with the sulfonamide, we now have what we know as the 1938 Food and Drug and Cosmetic Act that really sets the parameters of what we still currently do today in 2021. So some of the provisions it gave us, it included oversight of cosmetics and therapeutic devices. It required that drugs need to be shown as safe before being marketed. And therefore really starting this new system of drug regulation by making sure things were really safe to give to people. It allowed us to inspect factories and allowed us to have court injunctions in addition to any previous penalties of seizures and prosecutions for things that were going against what the law said. And really, this is the first time that we had this a requirement of safety for our drugs and medicines. The next,
Michelle?
Yes.
Sorry, I don't want to interrupt you, but your slides aren't advancing. I just wanted to.
Nope,
okay. I'm so sorry.
It's okay. I'm going to stop sharing and reshare again because you never know, right? Let me try this. Let me try to get out of this view that I'm in. Okay, so I may give you an oral history and not have slides.
I wasn't sure. I didn't want to interrupt your flow, but I thought I saw you clicking through, so I wasn't sure.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, I don't like that. All right, we're going to do an oral history, and I'll send you the slide. How's that? That works.
We can share them in the group.
There we go. See, we're always flexible with things that happen. I feel like we've learned a lot of that in the last 18 months.
Absolutely. So, if one thing's for certain, there'll be technical errors and problems. So
yes.
And you can, Shelly's offering if you want to send them to me and share, but let's just
talk. I'll get them out to you guys. So the next thing, I think a lot of us have actually heard about this event was thalidomide, right? We all heard about that in the 60s. And really what happened is in 1962, what we have now in use is a law that was called the Kefauver and Harris Drug Amendment Act. And this was the time when now we had to evaluate efficacy, which does the drug work? So in addition to being safe, does this actually work in people, right? We want to know this now. And so briefly, I think a lot of us know the history of thalidomide and what happened, but it was something that was being evaluated. It had already been used in Europe. It was coming over to the US to get approved. And a young, brand new medical officer named Frances Kelsey, who in the drug development science world, is very well known and very revered for this work. When she was reviewing this stuff, she had questions. She had a lot of questions about the safety. She had a lot of questions about what was going on. And really, because of her, that is why the drug was never approved in the US at that time. And so because of that, in the 1962 Act, it really ensured that we had to ensure both, like I said, drug efficacy, which is does the drug work, and safety. And really, this was the first time that drug manufacturers were required to prove to the FDA that their products were both safe and effective before they could market them. And 1962, while I always like to think that's not that far long ago, it really isn't that far long ago when you think about the spectrum of time. And for example, both my parents were born by then, so it's not that really long ago that we finally were like, well, we should make sure that things are safe and effective and work on our patients and to people. And it's important to note that, the FDA regulates a lot of the gross domestic product of the US. So we want to make sure that, what the things that we are saying can be marketed is safe for the American public. And so as well is, and I'm just quickly bringing up biologics, even though I'm in the center of drugs. I do know that perhaps maybe there could be a gene therapy. There could be something in the biologic space for you guys. I don't know. We don't know what's going to happen in that side. But actually, so in 1902 was a Biologic Control Act, which was passed to ensure the purity and safety of serums, vaccines, and similar products. And actually, up until 1972, was regulated under the NIH and their labs, and then got transferred to FDA. So that's just a little bit of like, how do we get to what we do every day now? Like, what are the laws that we have to follow? At the FDA, we have 3 medical product centers. I'm obviously going to focus on the Center for Drugs because that's where I am. But we also have our Center for Devices and Radiologic Health, or CDRH. And so that they actually regulate everything from a Band-Aid to an MRI machine. It's amazing. And my colleagues that work there, I learn something new from them every day of what they regulate. I think, they regulate laboratory tests and things like that. So they actually cover a lot of and their regulations are different from this for drugs and biologics. Our regulations are the same between the 2 centers, but CDRH has some different regulations with devices. And then we have our Center for Biological Evaluation, which I would say is aligned with us in terms of regulations and laws. So both the same rules apply for both drugs and biologics for what is needed and evidence needed for approvals. So let's talk about drug development. And I know you've had some past presentations on what happens, but I think it's important to know and remind everyone that the FDA does not conduct clinical trials, right? That is done by investigators, pharmaceutical companies, academic investigators. But what we do is we review the information of the data that comes in and works with the respective investigators on how to be collecting the adequate information that would support what we need under our laws to be able to market a drug product. And so when we start the drug development process, the first step is just discovery. We need to find a molecule, right? And this can take many years to really just look to see what kind of molecule may work, And if something does, it would then proceed on to what we know as preclinical research or non-clinical. So this is when we are testing in our animal studies. And this is often when we're trying to look at safety. We're looking at what is maybe appropriate doses. What is the highest level dose that we could take a drug? Is there an animal model that may be helpful to maybe mimic what would be like in humans? So all this work has to happen first before we say, okay, you can administer this drug into a human. And so all this preclinical work needs to happen first. Once this work happens is when someone will come and then engage with the FDA and submit something known as an investigation new drug application, or an IND. And this is when they're really wanting to now test a molecule into humans. And oftentimes we're looking at this animal work that's already happened to make those decisions, and there are requirements what must be shown before that can happen. So we're then going to be testing into humans. And there's different phases of our clinical trials. So our first phases are usually phase 1. And this is usually where we're done. If we were in, I would say, more common diseases, we would want to be testing this in healthy subjects. And even some of our more, I would say, more rare diseases that may have a larger population in the rare disease community, you're going to really try to test this in your healthy subjects. These are often very short trials, and you're looking at safety. Is this safe, right? What does that data look like? And we're also looking to see, how is this drug metabolized? How is it excreted? All those things. How does it impact the body? If there seems to be promise from that, drugs will move from a phase 1 to phase 2 study. And only about 70% of molecules will make it even that far. And in our phase 2 studies is when we're going to start exploring, we're going to continue exploring safety. But here we're going to be maybe exploring dose. What is the appropriate dose in patients? We're going to start look at efficacy. or how does this drug work? What is it supposed to be improving in these trials? And so these are really important pivotal points, these phase 2 trials, because if the trial is successful, this is when it will go into that phase 3 trial. Now, we know in rare disease that oftentimes having multiple trials can be difficult because our populations are often very small. And this is why it's always important to come and engage with us at the agency to have these conversations on what a drug development plan would look like for a specific molecule in a patient population, and really what is available in terms of recruiting patients. So again, this is why we encourage people to come and talk to us early to have that conversation and really map out someone's development program. So if we have something that is successful and can be moved into a phase 3, it's important to know, unfortunately, we brought 70% from the first to the phase 2. We may only have 30, 33, a third of that will actually go forward. And those phase 2 studies are often really critical because you're getting more safety data, right? We're getting more data on that. These phase 2 trials may be not as long as your confirmatory trial or your phase 3 trial. So we're getting some efficacy, but we're really hoping to confirm that in this phase 3 trial. So in the phase 3 trial, these are typically the trials that are intended for the basis of a marketing application approval. These are the really big trials when you think about them. If we were talking about a common disease, this is when we'd be having maybe hundreds of people depending on the disease itself. And they will, of course, depending on what you're trying to treat, will depend on the duration of the trial. It could be very short. It could be a year-long trial. It really depends. And obviously, our gold standard is the randomized placebo-controlled trials, where we have a placebo arm, and those arms are really important because they help us make sure we know that it keeps the balance between the arms, but making sure if things are emerging in the treatment side, particularly on safety, is it happening in the placebo arm? Does the treatment really work? We really need that comparator to help us. Again, these trials are really important, and we again recognizing rare disease, that's when we may have to think about, again, coming early and talking to us about what does a development program look like for this. But these are really those trials to demonstrate efficacy. We're still continuously collecting safety data, though. So always happening is safety is never forgotten, no matter what trial design you're in. It's always being collected, and oftentimes we are getting now the longer exposures of drugs in humans and knowing how they're really acting. And, if this is a treatment that's going to be chronic and going to be used daily, we really want to have that long-term data. If this is something that's acute, it will look different. Again, it all depends on what you're studying, but the principles are still the same of collecting safety and efficacy data. If we have successful phase 3 trials that can support a marketing application, a new drug application or biological licensing application will be submitted, and we'll review it, and we'll make a determination of based on the data. And sometimes if we do approve things, we may want to have some additional studies done afterwards, and you hear those. Sometimes it's the phase 4 stuff, or post-market experience. And sometimes we want to get some more long-term safety data. Maybe we want to get more information going forward. Again, those are conversations that happen during the drug development process that a company will have with the agency of what that will look like. Our review teams are multidisciplinary teams. So includes medical officers and statisticians. We have pharmacologists and chemists. We have people who evaluate the facilities as inspectors. We have people who are familiar with the chemistry and the manufacturing process. So when we approve something, we're also approving its manufacturing of the product. And so we have people that go out to make sure things are being manufactured correctly, that they stay in solution correctly, that the expiration date makes sense. So we have people that's all they do. We have very big multidisciplinary teams that look at these applications and are part of the entire drug development process. So it's not like all of a sudden they're coming in towards the end. They've been there all along. And depending on what these conversations you're having, you may have different expertise at the table on that day. But in the end, this entire multidisciplinary team is really part of the process and are reviewing every aspect of the data that we receive. So because we follow the Code of Federal Regulations, this tells us what we're mandated by regulation and law. And in general, the application of an approval requires that it meets the requirements of safety and efficacy that we've talked about, but also something I mentioned, chemistry, manufacturing controls, the manufacturing piece. And so things, they all have to be in a line and have to meet what the requirements are laid out in law that we have to follow. And that we need to make sure that the efficacy standards that we abide by states that a drug program must provide substantial evidence consisting of adequate and well-controlled investigations. This has often been translated that you need to have 2 well-controlled and adequate trials to submit an application, where obviously know in rare disease that may be difficult. And again, this is why you need to come and have these conversations of that program and what it would look like, so we're able to, be able to make a decision. We also have to have our safety standards. So, we have to make sure that we're meeting that. And so the regulations discuss what would be some of these standards can be, and we have some interpretation of them. So, our safety standard explains that if an application cannot be approved, it could be because it didn't include all the adequate tests of methods that are needed for the safety. We need to make, the drug may be unsafe for use. There may be more, for example, adverse reactions happening in one arm than the other, and it cannot be explained. We can't mitigate it. So we really are looking at safety the entire time, and we have regulations on what that means. When we look at all that, we look at something called a benefit risk framework, right? And this is really summarizes the benefits of how a drug is used. Do the benefits outweigh the risk? And we look at all the data for that. And where patients come into play is that we learn from our patient communities through various types of engagement opportunities, such as this one, such as our patient listening sessions and our PFDD meetings, about their lived experience. These are really important things for us to understand, because we're not necessarily the expert of every disease. There's 7,000 rare diseases. We have lots of really great experts who try to do their best when we have a lot of these different rare diseases. But we also know our families are the experts of every day. And so that's why we learn a lot from you. And it can help inform us of benefit risk, what would change look like, what would be meaningful. Those are things that are extremely helpful for us. And it may not always translate outside for you to see, but it's always conversations that we're having internally every day when we have had this engagement and we're thinking about advice to give or considering potential endpoints. What should we measure that would make sense? And that would demonstrate a clinical benefit, to a patient. So an improvement in how someone feels, functions, or survives. So with that, I think I'm just going to end that, patients are a big part of this, right? A big part of drug development. And you fit in many opportunities. So, patients are participants. Patients can help maybe design the trial design, depending on who their partners are with, or help inform partners as key opinion leaders when it comes to what's meaningful in their lives and what they would hope to change. So patients play an important role in the entire process. They can. And so it's always important, and the agency has really pushed towards our patient-focused drug development initiatives of making sure that we are including the patient voice. And it's more than just, did they capture that person's voice in the trials, but do we make sure we capture it throughout the entire process where it can be? It may not work in every circumstance exactly, where we can't always, it may not always align per se to every milestone. But there should be opportunities where you are being approached to tell about your lived experience and to help in that development side. So I do think that, there are many ways that patients can be involved, that if they don't meet their trial criteria, they're still contain valuable information that can help inform, because maybe down the line, if we do have approved treatments and therapies, then we may be able to change our inclusion criteria and they would become eligible. So we always need to continue to collect information from our patient groups and from our patients. Yesterday, I participated in the Rare Disease Cures Data and Analytics Platform workshop. And this was something I said in the panel I participated on about that. It's important when it comes to natural history that we're not only including those who may be clinical trial eligible, but we need to collect all of our patients' information, because we don't know what the future is going to hold for us. And we may have a shift in what our trial criteria looks like. And if we only limit it to those patients, we are missing out on a critical segment of the patient population. And we need that natural history data. We need to understand how the disease progresses, how it manifests, what happens. Because of the heterogeneity in most of our rare diseases, this is really critical information for us. It helps us be able to make the best selection of endpoints and suggest that, and have better dialogues with the industry members when they're coming to talk with us about how do we select something that will fit the broadest population. So those are just some words I have right now. I want to make sure I reserve time for questions in our conversation with Hillary, but we encourage people to come. We encourage industry to come and talk to us early and often. And we really, do value what our patients, and we learn from them every day.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think these words are so important to our families. And as I give our families a chance to start to queue up their questions, we are not known for being a shy group. So hopefully we'll have plenty of questions. And as you guys are queuing them up, I just want to remind you, as you know, Dr. Campbell can't speak directly to any program that's under consideration at the FDA. She can't talk about anything in that level of specificity, but she can answer some general questions. So if you are asking a specific question, you may get a more general answer, but ask your questions and queue up. But I think as people are thinking about what they'd like to ask, I wanted to sort of echo what you said about FDA's interest in the patient voice. And I think this is something, as patients, and caregivers, we often hear that people want to hear our voices, and then they don't necessarily listen to them, or it's like a checkbox that they're ticking off. And I have wondered, and one of the reasons I wanted to have you here is I've worried that perhaps our families, because FDA is this regulatory body that's kind of up over here, that they haven't seen, as you said, it doesn't always translate the level of concern. And I can speak very personally to my part of an interaction that I had with you and your colleagues, and, bringing our patient stories directly to you and saying, here's what they had to say. And I kind of did an upper level analysis of those words, because I wanted to save time. But families, many of you know this, but what I was asked for was, can you send all of it? Can we just have everything that everybody said so we can read through it? And I walked away feeling so encouraged by the level at which there was concern about specific details of everyday lives of our families, and how seriously that was taken, both in that moment and then from what I understand beyond. And it's real. It was very real, and I wanted to be sure that you had the chance to be speaking directly to our families so that they can see it as well.
Yeah, no, well, thank you for that. And I think that is kind of hard for many patient groups to really see that, they'll get an hour in front of us and they'll talk to us, but what do we really do with that information? And I often talk to a lot of groups prior to if they have a patient-focused drug development meeting, for example, and and I often give opening remarks, and my remarks usually go something along the lines of, you're our experts and we learn from you, and that's what we're here to do that day. And that one of the things is that we can't often show you what we do with what we hear, right? Because oftentimes our conversations are going to turn back internally, and we're going to talk about them amongst ourselves. And we'll then use it when we have someone come in for, a meeting with us for maybe a new product or a new molecule. And it will say, hey, you remember when we heard this? Does this make sense? This is what they're suggesting. Are we sure? So we do use the information. And like you said, it's kind of hard sometimes to see that, or it just takes so long to see that, right? The drug development process is a lengthy process, unfortunately. We have some initiatives happening. We're hoping we can accelerate our rare disease drug development, but it's still going to take time. No matter what, drug development does take time. And so you coming and talking to me now, for example, we may not see the fruition of these conversations for a couple of years, right? And that can be seen because we can't, it's not an instantaneous, like, oh, they heard us type thing. It doesn't always happen that way. And I know sometimes it's hard to be like, oh, they say they heard us, but did they really? And unfortunately, I have no way of being like, yes, we heard you. I can only tell you that, until I'm blue in my face that, we do really listen and do hear. But I do think the engagement opportunities that the agency has really laid out in the last few years has really, really shown our commitment to listening to patients. There are many venues and opportunities where we listen to patients. I feel like I'm listening to a patient group, once or twice a week. And that's part of my job. That's what I'm supposed to do. And our medical officers really do learn a lot from this. And sometimes, we'll sit there and ask questions because, you are our experts. So please know that we really do hear this. We really hear this. So one of the questions I see is about where are some of these venues? So our patient affairs staff, or I think now it's the Office of Patient Affairs, has patient listening sessions. And this is a way where it actually, because of where it sits in the agency, it can include actually many of our medical product centers. So not only would you get people from CDER, from the Center for Drugs, but also our Center for Biologics, and perhaps our Center for Devices. It just really depends. And so these are usually meetings that happen, and they're listening sessions, and different groups will come and they really just present the lived experience. Sometimes they have questions to us, but we, again, are really there just to sit to listen. We may be able to ask questions at the end or answer them. But oftentimes it is really that listening session that happens, and we sit back and listen. So that's probably the biggest venue, I would say. I know folks like to have externally led patient-focused drug development meetings. I think that's the next level sometimes. There seems to be a progression with some of these things. And it has to also fit the need. So, what's happening in the drug development space? Is it needed type thing? Maybe in a couple of years, depending on what's happening in your space, as you said, trials are beginning to start. Where's that timing for the best engagement? And I think that's also important to think about is the timing. And I'm really sorry for the ringing.
It's okay.
I knew my house phone would ring at, but I think, that's also important part of thinking about this is when is the appropriate time to engage, and what does that level of engagement look like? Is it a basic knowledge of the, of lived experience? Is it something else? And that can shift over time depending on what is happening in drug development and what is the need. So I think that's really important.
And I think our community has, for a number of reasons, has less formally reached out to FDA, and I think that's been a really interesting process too, to see that we've gone through the first steps to do a listening session, and we'll consider moving forward with that. But it was really interesting to see also that this process of just saying, okay, here's a letter, and here's what we're thinking about, and here's the story of this little boy and this little girl, and remember when I wrote the letter that preceded our call, I ran it by a friend of mine who's been in drug development for most of his adult life. And I said, "Would you think this is okay? It's I don't know. I don't really know." And he said, "Well, I cried on the third line." So if that's your goal, go forward. And to me, that it was interesting to hear someone who's been in that space for so long to say, yeah, you got to hit them emotionally. And that's,
we're humans too. I mean, we're humans. It does not mean we do not care. We do not, I mean,
yeah.
There are plenty of times when I'm tearing up on things. A lot of people are. We are humans too. We are still people. We still care. It's a unique position to sometimes be in. But we feel those things too.
Yeah. And part of that process, I think that's so important is that the hands-off piece, the things that the family see, that's part of your caring, right? You can't be objective unless you maintain a certain amount of distance. And what we need is not just a drug on the market, but we need a drug on the market that works and is safe for our children.
Right.
And we need to get there quickly because we're losing our children along the way. And that's all part of the flexible conversation.
Exactly. And these are all hard conversations that we have. I mean, obviously we think about how long it takes to get a drug and a successful trial to market. It can take time, and I'm really afraid to answer the question that the person Karen put up, because I don't think she's going to want to hear the answer to that. So we know that drug development can take on average between 15 to 20 years between discovery of a molecule to actual approval. Now, I'm giving you that wide range of including the discovery of the molecule piece, because that's how it has to start, right? We have to have something to even test. And in some places that it's hard to even just, where do you start, right? And that's why we have to understand our natural history of our diseases and the progression and course, so we understand what to target, right? And what should we be looking for. And I know that's a really long time, and our rare disease communities don't have that. They absolutely don't. Their kids are, the children are dying, or their loved one, because a rare disease can also happen in adulthood as well, and whatnot. And we understand that. We wish we could change that, but again, we aren't doing the trials, and so. If you don't have, for example, enough sites to get the trials to start, right, or things like that, that's things that unfortunately we're not a part of. But these can be barriers to getting through the development process. If we need to wait for patients, or if we have a rare disease and you're trying to get every patient possible, it just really varies. But we recognize it takes time, and that's why we encourage our rare disease developers to come in early and talk to us, because we recognize that we don't have much time. We don't have a lot of opportunities. How can we do the best job possible from the beginning, right? We don't have the opportunity maybe to do multiple trials, for example. We don't have that population.
Yeah. And I guess maybe given the place where we are as a population, maybe the way to rephrase Karen's question that might be a little bit more meaningful in the situation that we're in would be how, if you are getting to the end of a phase 2-3 trial in an ultra rare disease. So let's say that phase 2-3 is kind of a little mushy because we don't have the population to. So let's say that trial wraps, which a commencement of a trial like that, you might have a year or two to get all of the patients through the protocol. Once that ends, when does commercialization happen? When does it go from, okay, we've got all the data into FDA, and now I can get my drug at the pharmacy, assuming that there's an approval, obviously, which is
right.
A good
outcome. From a time of a application being submitted to the decision, the regulatory decision can vary. So we have standard timeline, which is, if I remember correctly, 10 months, and I think our accelerated, or not accelerated, priority review is 6 months, 6 to 8 months, something like that. So it takes time. I mean, definitely takes time. And, but I would say 10 months is the standard approval. Obviously, a determination is made of which review clock is used when an application is submitted. And so, obviously we want to get our therapeutic out as quickly as we can. But there's a lot of information that we have to review. As I mentioned, we're also inspecting sites. So we're inspecting where the studies happen. You're inspecting where things are being manufactured. We're making sure the manufacturing process is correct. So it's a lot of that multidisciplinary team, is really busy during that time of reviewing the data, make sure data makes sense. But all these other things that I don't think people understand in drug development that occur, particularly in that manufacturing side, and the inspection side, and making sure everything lines up and things of that nature. But we do our best we can. So.
And it looks, we have a question about age of participants. And this is, of course, a little bit of a tough conversation in our community at the moment. Obviously, we have very young children who are affected, and often severely so. And obviously their parents are eager to find trials for them and to get treatments for them. So we have a question about age of, how is the age for participation determined in trials, specifically for diseases where onset is early and the disease is severe? Any instances where young children were able to participate in an initial trial?
Yeah, so I would say in our rare diseases we see in the trials we see, typically we are going into pediatric populations and we're going into young children. So I think it depends on what are we studying, what are we actually targeting. So and I'm going to use I'm going to use a very general example, but perhaps you're targeting something that does not come out until maybe 3 or 4, for example. I don't know. Completely making this up off the top of my head, right? So it has to make sense. Would we want to try to prevent it? So do we go into younger children? Do you want to try to treat the symptom? So you go into the older ages. It really depends on what are you trying to study and what we call mechanism of action. What is that molecule going to do? And that will help then determine what ages. But really in our rare diseases, we see all ages. We see a very wide spectrum of ages because we recognize that a lot of our rare diseases start in the pediatric community. And so a lot of the trials are there. So now, we do have some things that are emerging in the epilepsy trials and things of that. There are some other mechanisms that are available for some of the lower ages with data and things. And those are those kind of conversations that a company will have with the review division when it comes to their program and things of that nature. But in a lot of our rare diseases, we're seeing a very wide age range, including the younger ages. Some of our SMA, our spinal muscular atrophy trials, we were talking infants, really young ages. So it's that determination really will be determined on what are we trying to study? What is the drug supposed to do? How does it tie to the disease and disease progression? And when maybe if you're going, let's say we're targeting a symptom, for example, again, making up a general example, when does that symptom maybe emerge? And that's what your target is. So it's not a simple one simple question to answer, but do know that we recognize that our rare diseases, most of them are pediatric and affect children at a young age. And so we are very much understand that and try to work with our investigators on how to include, as many patients as possible that can help us.
And I think this highlights why this is so important and our community is stellar at this compared to many communities, that when there are opportunities that we bring to you to say, hey, let's tell our potential investigators, our pharma partners, information about who we are and what's important to us, why that's so important, because that helps them design the trial in a way that they bring it to FDA to say, hey, this is why this is important. And likewise, when we have opportunities to talk to people at FDA, that we tell them so that they're saying, oh yeah, when so-and-so says this, that confirms what we're seeing here. And that's why this is a risk that this community is willing to take. I know we have a ton of questions for
I
you, as
know.
I expected. And I know I want to be mindful of time. So we have a placebo question here, which is why profile of patients before taking a drug can't be patients. Oh, okay. So she's basically saying, why do we need to have a placebo?
Right.
It's
And so we
a lot of
understand
effort for, yeah.
Yeah, no, we understand that question. It's a question we get a lot. This is something that we understand. So we also understand that most trials happen at large academic centers, and that travel and burden are extremely hard for our patients and their families. We definitely recognize that. And I think some lessons learned during COVID is the emergence of more decentralized trials, and what does that look like, type thing. Placebo arm is actually really important. And I know that, and I say this because having worked with families with rare diseases before I came to FDA, I know this is very hard. It's a very hard conversation, and we hear this all the time. Placebo arm is actually really helpful for us in a couple ways, right? So we need to know what's happening. So if we have, for example, a condition that doesn't really have a good natural history, right? We don't have, it has a lot of heterogeneity. We're not really sure what progression looks like. That placebo arm is really critical in that trial, right? Because we need to make sure that what we're seeing when we do provide treatment to maybe the treatment arm, that what is happening, that placebo arm is kind of providing us the information that we may not have from that natural history. So they're very important arms. They continue to provide us with safety information. So if we are seeing something, and if everyone's received treatment, for example, right, everyone's on treatment, and we don't have the placebo arm, and we're starting to see something on the safety side, we may not have anything to compare it to. So is it really because of the drug, or is it because of the disease progression, and we have a poor natural history and we don't know? So our placebo arm is a very important arm in trials. And I know that we're always we want our child to have the opportunity to be able to seek a treatment, but we need to make sure that treatment is safe and effective as well. So I always feel like the placebo arm is such a critical arm that is just as important as that treatment arm because of the information. I also understand why parents wish that they could just everyone have the treatment, but we still don't know at that point if it's safe and effective. And so that placebo arm really plays that critical role in helping us make sure, yes, this will be. And there's many trial designs that do allow the opportunity for that arm to be able to eventually have treatment. And again, those are things that should be considered and may be considered when developers come in and talking to us about what that would look like. So there is that opportunity, but that placebo arm is really important to us and the data it can provide when we really do. And unfortunately, in a lot of our rare diseases do not have clear natural histories. This is the way that can help us, because obviously we want to make sure that we're putting something in the market that is safe and effective.
I want to be sure we get some of Tyler. You had some questions that I think were in the Q&A, and Shelley has moved them over. So I want to hit those. In SCN8A, certain variants have characterized multiple mechanisms of failure. So we have a limit on efficacy for current AEDs. Compassionate use, is compassionate use considered for drugs post phase 1?
I may actually pull up a different So I will tell you right now, I'm not the expert on that, but I think so compassionate use or expanded access programs more first of all, we support them. They need to be offered by the drug company. They're from them. And I think we would want to see at least safety to make sure it works. And then again, I think it's going to depend on where the person is in their trial, but those are conversations with industry with that. And the agency 98-99% approves expanded access programs, but it has to make sense. It's important that they can inform and collect important data, but again, it does have to make sense and with what's going on. So, but those are things that we encourage industry to make sure they include these type of programs in their development programs.
And I think, Tyler, we can have more conversations as a community about this. We do have so there are multiple companies in the space, and it really is a company by company decision as to whether they would allow something like emergency access or expanded access. And that process is a little bit complicated, but it has to originate from a clinician. And then that clinician makes a request to the company, and then that company says whether they would pursue it, and then they have to talk to FDA. And so there's a lot of steps involved. But some companies, regardless of what FDA would say as their bottom line, they don't do it. And there's all sorts of reasons that they don't do it, and certain companies are much more open to it. So we can talk about that more as a community as we go forward.
Mm-hmm.
I think we are at time. If you don't mind, Dr. Campbell, can I pass along any questions that have not been answered? I'm actually thinking some of these slightly more science-based questions, it might actually be helpful to have a couple of people take a run at them. But if there's anything that isn't answered, is it okay if I pass it along to you? And
yeah, you can pass it along. Probably you'll give you some high-level answers with some of these that I see on here. Type things, but please know that I think, to me, from what I'm seeing, it's an exciting time in the rare epilepsies. There seems to be a lot of work happening. I know we all wish there was something here today, but please do know that we hear you, and the fact that there are starting to be opportunities for trials is really great. So do know that we do hear from your lived experience, and hopefully you're able to educate your pharma partners on what that looks like, and then be able to help make sure we have adequate designs of our trials to be able to answer these questions of these products are safe and effective for you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Campbell. I am just so grateful for your time and all of the work that you all are doing on our community and other communities like us, our behalf. And families, as always, I'm so grateful for you showing up and asking your questions, because
these are some really I gotta admit, these are some really hard questions. I mean, These are some questions in here that I'm like, I would need my other colleagues, like some of my non-clinical colleagues and stuff. These are some, but this is why our patient families are the experts.
Yeah, our community is, they make me so proud. I'm like, the level of questions that we get, the thoughtfulness, the knowledge that's contained in this community, and not just, all communities have a ton of knowledge in them, but as a community, our ability to sort of capture it, share it, ask it, demand answers when we need to, is really incredibly breathtaking. And I know we talked a bit about that, Michelle, when we talked about doing this today, and I'm really happy to have you see that in action, because it's extraordinary. It's extraordinary. I tell this community all the time how extraordinary they are. I think they're tired of me telling them that, but they are. And so to wrap things up, and I want to just be careful with everyone's time today. Thank you again for being here, Michelle. We just really, really appreciate it. Please pass along our best to your colleagues, and let them know they'll be hearing more from us. And thank you, as always, to the TCSF team that helps make this happen. Shelley today for doing multiple jobs, Megan and Casey, who are usually here, and keep this program up and running. And just a reminder, we've got another meeting again next week, this time with Dr. Eric Wengert. A lot of us watched him do his PhD defense, and he's going to come and do our STNA 101 with the addition of the sort of science of potential treatments. So talk about the problem, talk about potential treatments that can solve those problems. Not a clinical conversation, but a scientific one. And so we will see you all here next week. Dr. Campbell, you're welcome to come back and join us again if you so desire.
Thank you.
And until then, we'll see all of you in the support group, and we'll be back here next week. Thank you again, Dr. Campbell.
All right. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye. Have a great day.